And with that, we are now live. Welcome everybody to another edition of the Astro Weather. Outside today, it is very wet. We have a wet and cold world just beyond the windowed off wall of my studio here in the beautiful and free hill country of Texas. Hope everybody is having a good day wherever you are, and whatever good means to you. Good can be can be applied to learning things and understanding things, even when things don't go according to plan. Isn't that right? We have the Astro Cat with us straight out of the gate today. He really wanted to get in on the frame. Jasper, you have anything you want to share with people on this wet Wednesday? Anything you want to say? I want you to come back over here. Hold down the fort. Keep the evil spirits away. All right. We have a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any more time. Well, what do you want to talk about? You want to talk about the cat that's living upstairs that we're trying to bring into the house and how you're freaked out about it? Yeah, well, you'll get used to it. You'll get used to it. Need a little younger energy around here. You'll still be the man, though. There's no doubt about that. Before I get started, I wanted to address something. So there's a couple things that I aim to do with this daily stream. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to make it more personal, meaning that I wanted to pick out aspects and talk about aspects that are happening that could theoretically impact you, or if you're aware of the energy and the trends, you can notice them, work with them, right? So this exercise tends to be a bit more personal versus my Sunday night show, which tends to be a bit more mundane, although the mundane does creep into this. When I say mundane, I'm talking about mundane astrology, not mundane things like watching Joe Biden last night. But that said, I feel like I have to comment on the earthquake in Turkey over the weekend. There were a couple of comments on yesterday's Astro Weather that basically wanted to know why I didn't talk about the earthquake in Turkey. Well, there's a couple of reasons why, and I'll try to clarify them. First of all, I had gone through my own personal earthquake on Sunday night and Saturday night and Sunday, like big stuff. Like, a friend and a member of Chattaria died. And, if you want to hear more about that story, you can go to my website, 15 Minutes of Flame, where I detail in great clarity and precision, in my estimation, what was going on simultaneously between two people in non-local space, right? So that was really as they say, top of mind. The other thing is that I have, and this is just my personal belief and opinion about what happened in Turkey, and it was less astrological and more geopolitical. And that's something I'll talk about on my website and my stream that happens at 9/11 over on 15 minutes of, that's ovflame.com. Because in order for me to really look at Turkey in an astrological sense, I would have to really drill down into the chart of Turkey, and I'd have to look at a lot of different things, and it's very, very specific work. Yes, Uranus is in Taurus, and yes, we can expect earth changes with Uranus and Taurus. That's kind of on the menu and has been for a while. But I think it's more geopolitical than astrological. Do the two converge? Sometimes, occasionally, yes, they do. They can. When we look at something like China, or a country like China with China's chart, and seeing what China's going through and will be going through as Pluto hits its ascendant and hits its natal Saturn with the latest version of China under the reign of Mao. I've talked about that many times on my Sunday night show, right? So I just wanted to clarify two reasons why I did not get into Turkey yesterday. One, I had a much hotter personal issue to burn. Secondly, I think it was more geopolitical than astrological. Now, that can bleed into the astrological from the mundane perspective. But again, that's a much different conversation. And what I try to do here is I try to make this show personal so that you can get something out of it. Now, the mundane stuff is always, I think you can get a lot out of it. You can see where things are going, and we're moving into more of a mundane universe and into less of a personal one. So you need to be able to understand what's happening on a theoretical global level, right? So that said, let's get into the weather for today. Thanks for listening to that. I just needed to clarify that. All right, so here we go. 2/8/23, 8 a.m., Austin, Texas. Here we have that Virgo moon, and boy, did I get some feedback on that. I got some good feedback on the Virgo moon and the Chiron Juno conjunction in Aries, and talking about dental health. The other thing too, Aries rules the head. So we could also look at Juno and Chiron coming together and looking at new ways to keep your brain and your mind, which aren't always the same, right? The brain is the physical organ, the mind is the metaphysical organ, and how you can keep them healthier, renew them, right? So when you look at an aspect like this, you can say, well, you know, what helps my brain? Well, things like fish oil can be really, really good for your brain. There's a number of supplements that can help charge your brain. There's even some things that can help regrow parts of your brain. And what's really interesting here too is because when we get into Aries, we talk about blood. You know, Aries is blood. And when we have Chiron in Aries, you know, there's a rupture in potentially the head or the brain, right? So we talk about the brain blood barrier, and you know how I think, this is just my own personal opinion, how I think the brain blood barrier has been compromised by let's say the tiny pieces of technology that are so small that it can move between the area that's supposed to be separate, right? To separate your treasure, the crown, right? This is the crown up here. You know, how many cartoons or movies have you seen where the goal is to find some, you know, sacred crown or some treasured crown, and to steal it or retrieve it or however they spin it, right? That is the crown. And this part is the crown. And so that whole brain blood barrier is the thing that's supposed to protect the crown, and that's been compromised. So what you're looking at here, in my opinion, what you're looking at here also is a way for you to fortify and strengthen your brain. And there's a lot of different things that you can do that. You can read, you can take some of the supplements that I mentioned. Ginkgo biloba tends to be pretty good. I've been hearing really good results or good things about ginkgo biloba and zinc being paired together. So phosphatidylserine is another really interesting thing that you could take to kind of build up those fatty acids in your brain. Also cream, right? Cream and meat, and you know, things that are going to be less on the plant-based side and more on the carnivore side. Do you imagine that? So this is a good day to do that. You know, how do you keep your brain healthy and look at new ways that you can fortify, because you need your brain, right? That's one part of the equation. The other part is mind, and the brain is the hardware and the mind is the software for the body. So today we have Mars moving into a nice sextile with Chiron and Juno. So it's an intellectually stimulating day. We're looking for new things, right? We're trying to satiate our curiosity, and you know, can we get better, right? That's the whole idea here. We live in a time of degraded entropy and systems collapse, but really the goal is to keep improving, right? That is the goal, is to keep improving, whatever that means to you. And so the restless energy of Mars and Gemini can be quite good for that. So if you're into research today or into research period, This next, 48-hour, 72-hour period can be really good and might yield some very interesting results. And Mars in Gemini is always poking into areas that you may not always be familiar with, right? Because one side of it is, well, this is my path, and I know what this is about. I've tried all these things, but what happens over here? Oh, this is completely unexplored to me. For some people, it might even be something like Ayurvedic, right? It's like, oh, what is this Ayurvedic thing? I actually take an Ayurvedic supplement every day, and I got to tell you, it tastes like shit, but I think it works. So this is a really good period over the next 72 hours to be intellectually curious and find things that will improve the quality of your brain and ultimately the quality of your life. Nice aspect right here. Let's go back to our friend the moon. It's in Virgo. Now we've got it into the third decan, which puts it into the Tauran decan. And, when we get into the Tauran decan, everything matters and everything counts, right? It's all about materiality. It's all about, making that mercurial Virgo moon settle down and have a bit more fixed position. And today we see the moon coming into a nice trine with Pluto in Mercury. And for a mercurial moon like Virgo to be in the third decan and come into that trine with Mercury Pluto, that's a very, very powerful alignment between your emotions and your thoughts and your ideas, and deep motivation, very deep motivation. So with Pluto, Pluto will elicit things like fear, right? And there's one fear, and that's the fear of death. In this situation, there's not a lot of discord with Pluto. So the idea of digging deeper, going deeper, being able to, for lack of a better term, affirm that you are going to serve the best interests of your own emotions. This is a big theme today. And the moon in Virgo is about health, right? It's about healthy expression of one's emotions, healthy boundaries. Today's a good day to set them. And we have the moon in opposition with Neptune and still in opposition with Venus. So we still have this really interesting mutable opposition going on. And of course, over here, Venus and Neptune, love is love. Love is love, right? Unconditional. The moon in Virgo says, well, hold on a second. We've got conditions here. And the conditions are, number one, is it healthy? Is it healthy? And number two, is it going to divest me of my emotional and or my physical energy, right? This is the dialogue and the debate here. So if you have a kid, this is one of those days where you sit down with your son and your daughter and you tell them the benefits of not going along with the crowd. This is one of those days, especially if you're a mother. There's the moon in Virgo. It's okay to set a boundary. It's okay to not be accepted, which is one of the hardest things that kids go through, is this whole idea of acceptance. And this is one of those days where that can be reinforced. Now, what's also interesting here is that we can kind of come into a bit of the bully pulpit with Mars square, and it's still in there with Mars square the moon and then Mars square Venus, and to some degree kind of an outside square with Neptune. To me, that's peer pressure. Peer pressure exists at any age. It doesn't have to solely exist in the adolescent years. So watch out for peer pressure today. Watch out for being pressured to take a position that you don't necessarily want to take. And for a lot of you, like I know who the audience is, and you guys are really smart. You do your own research, like a very impressive group that shows up here. So if you have to lay it out today's the day to lay it out, right? It's like, oh, would you like some facts? In that very clear, detached, analytical way that the Virgo moon can really operate in. Well, here's some facts for you. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And what do you think about this? And then you watch those people just scatter like roaches when you turn the light on in your kitchen at night, if you live in a roach infested area, right? So I really like today. I think today even with the Virgo moon, I think there's so many interesting things happening, especially with that moon Uranus trine as well. Like you're carving out kind of a different position. You're even though I think Virgo is a very conservative sign and wants to get along and blend in, today with the Uranus trine with the moon, it accentuates your ability to kind of stand out and have an authentic take on what you feel, because what you feel is going to be proven and tested over here, right? As we move through the next few hours, by the time we get to tonight and that moon goes into trine with Pluto, emotions are intense. We're dealing with things that are theoretically on the kind of life and death side, right? You get into that intensity with Pluto. But really, with that trine, you're leaning more into life than you are death. So today's a great day to make decisions that are well thought out, well thought through, perhaps a little bit anal. But if you do that, it will pay off. Remember, today you can really act with discernment and create some boundaries for yourself. And again, I think the big lesson here is for mothers with children who are having rough days. Today's the day to tell them you don't have to fit in. Today's the day to tell them, look, at some point along the way, what's going to happen is that the people that are either harassing you or forcing you to believe in what they believe, they will fall by the wayside. And they will. That's just how these things work, right? Anything else going on today? Oh, yeah, we got a nice sun. Well, the sun is still separated from Mars, so we still have the sun-Mars trine. And that's really good for just energy, mental stimulation. It's definitely on the devil's advocate side of things, right? The other thing, too, I want to talk about before we move on to the start of the day is the sun in conjunct with the moon. And that's a really, really interesting aspect. Because, again, the sun signifies the pulse, right? The pulse of where we are energetically in the weather, right? In your chart, it illuminates you. That's what the sun represents. The day of your birth, the sun is illuminating you and your possibilities. So when we have a sun moon in conjunct, we have this gap between what we're feeling, how we're feeling, and how it manifests in the totality of our being. And today's one of those days where there can be a bit of a gap in that area. And I just feel like this is from the mundane level that a lot of people feel that. A lot of people are feeling that. They're feeling out of place, feeling like, what happened? Whose America is this? Whose world is this? Right? So there's this, troubling piece of disconnect that's also kind of looming in the air. Lean into your ability to penetrate whatever it is that you're doing. Allow your emotional body, if it's driven by a need to know, and usually that's what happens with the moon in Virgo, it's a need to know. I have to be able to stem the tide of chaos in my life. So lean into that, right? Lean into it. If you're feeling disconnected, allow your emotional body to lean into deeper knowledge, a deeper sense of knowing what you know. And that's the other thing too, right? With that Pluto-Mercury conjunction, it's an instantaneous, powerful knowing that arises from the depths. All right, let's talk about the star of the day. Another day where I struggled a little bit to figure out who would be my star. A lot of competition for today. But ultimately, I chose one person, unlike yesterday when I chose two, just because they were weird time twins. And today's star of the day is James Dean. Died at 24 years of age. Very complex chart, very complex guy. I have some observations about him and his chart. And some things that have gone on in his life. So we'll talk about some of these things. The first thing, when I pulled his chart that really jumped out at me was his ascendant and then Uranus and the true node on his ascendant. So James Dean could be considered cinematically the first anti-hero, right? We associate James Dean with Rebel Without a Cause, this movie that spotlights that there's a sea change going on with the youth of America. When you get into the fourth turning, that's the second turning, and it's the season of the artist. And so that's when actors become very prominent. That's when musicians become very prominent. This is all post, World War II. These are the baby boomers tend to be in the that turning, right? So James Dean is really the icon. Now Marlon Brando was there before him, but Brando belongs to a different generation, and he's kind of an outlier. Dean is really associated with Teenage Rebellion. So we have Uranus on the ascendant, which is rebellious, right? We're in the month of Aquarius. And so Uranus on the ascendant means he's always going to do something unusual or different, and strange things can happen to him. And indeed, he crashed his Porsche at the age of 24. And I'm going to get into that a little bit because Aries is, I did a brief survey of my brain last night. Aries is associated with speed. And when you look at, I'll give you 1, 2, 3, 4 actors that are all prominent during the Dean era and after. And all 4 actors have a connection with motorsports and motor racing. And they all have very strong Aries aspects. First one, besides James Dean, who, by the way, actually ran in some amateur races, finished second once, first another time. And then I think the other 2, he might have crapped out his car or something. So it was not just, it was clearly a hobby for him, but it was a very serious hobby. So the other 4 actors would be James Garner, who's an Aries. And James Garner was into motorsports. Yeah, he did a movie called Grand Prix and actually sponsored a motorsports team and did some racing on his own. Steve McQueen, Aries. We all know that Steve McQueen was a big motorsports guy, from the Baja 500 and the stuff that he did on motorcycles and cars, right? So McQueen, Aries, James Garner, Aries, James Dean, Aries rising with Uranus here and a true node. And then the other person is Paul Newman, who we missed, whose birthday was January 26th. Newman has Mars in Aries. So Aries is definitely associated with speed and adrenaline, and James Dean has it in spades here. But ultimately, it is going to define his end as well, right? Because we've got this Uranus true node square with Pluto. And, what happens? He dies in a car. The strange thing about James Dean's car wreck, and I'll bring up the chart, is the fact that he basically ran into a car that pulled out in front of him. And the car was driven by a guy by the name of Donald Turnipseed. Can you believe that? Donald Turnipseed. And it was in Bumfuck, California, like a rural agricultural area of California. And Donald Turnipseed got out of his car without any injuries whatsoever. James Dean didn't suffer the same fate so easily, right? So Dean is a rebel, right? He is born into the rebel position with Uranus here. The other thing that really affects Dean tremendously. Speaking of Marlon Brando, the Aries, is around his ascendant, and James Dean was obsessed with Marlon Brando. He used to silently wait outside of Brando's apartment, and Brando would watch him from his window. Then after about 5 hours, he'd come out at his door, tell him to go away, and Dean would come back tomorrow, right? So very odd relationship there. And obsessed with another Aries. The big turning point for James Dean was the death of his mother. And when she died, everything kind of slides off the continental shelf in James Dean's life. And we can see Pluto down here in the 4th house in Cancer, which is the sign of the mother, in the house of the mother. And he has a Pluto-Saturn opposition going on in the chart right there, right? So it's going to impact and affect him. Eventually, his father can't handle him, and he sends him off to kind of a boarding school, reform school, a very kind of intense upbringing, born in Indiana, moves to California, His father, ironically enough, decides that he's going to study to be a dental assistant, right? So I guess, the Aries thing comes into play in his chart. And he has the moon in Scorpio. The moon is the mother, right? So we have this moon square Mars and moon square Saturn. It's kind of a wide square, but it's more square Mercury than it is Saturn. So James Dean working through very deep, very troubled emotions. He's generally considered to be bisexual, on most accounts, more than bisexual, queer. He did have some dalliances with women. How deep and how pronounced they were, that's a whole other story. Now, I did find some interesting info on Dean when it came to his high school years. And I'm going to bring this up here because it's really interesting and pertains to his Chiron. So I'm going to read from James Dean's Wikipedia page. So in adolescence, so when we talk about adolescence, what are we talking about? We're talking about, 13, 14, 15, 16. In adolescence, Dean sought the counsel and friendship of a local Methodist pastor. And this is where life gets really strange, right? Like when you just look at the names of people. The pastor's name is Dr. James DeWeerd. That's Deweerd, who seems to have had a formative influence upon Dean, especially upon his future interests in bullfighting, car racing, and theater. So James Dean wanted to be a bullfighter. And could you imagine a Methodist priest cheering him on? Yes, Jimmy, I think that's a wonderful idea. Show me the blade you would use to take down that big beastly bull. Let me pretend I'm the bull, right? That's so weird, right? But it kind of fits. I mean, especially the car racing part that will ultimately be his demise. According to Billy J. Harbin, Dean had an intimate relationship with his pastor, which began in his senior year of high school and endured for many years. Now, there's reports that it started earlier. An alleged sexual relation was suggested in Paul Alexander's 1994 book, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, The Lifetimes and Legend of James Dean. In 2011, it was reported that Dean once confided in Elizabeth Taylor that he was sexually abused by a minister approximately 2 years after his mother's death. Other reports on Dean's life also suggest he was either sexually abused by DeWeerd as a child or as a late teenager. So there seems to be some discrepancy there, but it's clear that he had an ongoing relationship with a man of the cloth, one whose name was DeWeerd. Anyway, let's take a look at that briefly. We can see Chiron here. Now, remember, Chiron is the wounded healer, and it basically shows us, where we feel out of place, where we feel like we've fallen out of grace, where our biggest wound in our experience is. And he has Chiron in Taurus, and I've talked about this many times. A lot of Gen Xers have Chiron in Taurus, so they have a hard time being on this planet, being in the world. Difficult. A lot of them are the byproduct of divorces. The baby boomers, who are the parents of the Gen Xers, started the biggest divorce wave ever in this country and in history. And so I think part of Chiron in Taurus is feeling dislocated, that there's no security, no safety, but there's more to it than that. The other thing that I've talked about with Chiron is the degree of Chiron represents the chirotic crisis. So if we go back by 1 year, which would be 13, and another year, which would be 15, because Chiron does a lot of retrograding, right? So it could happen when he's 15, even though his Chiron's at 14. Depends on where Chiron was. So I give a latitude of about 2 years. So either the degree before, which would be 13, or the degree after 15, this lines right up with his connection with Reverend James DeWeerd, right? So it's going to separate him out from the rest of, theoretically society, although I think he's living in LA at the time, which means that he's not so separated. But this Chiron is also squaring his sun and opposing his moon. James Dean had a hard time. It's not an easy chart. This is not an easy chart at all. Yes, he's got Mars and Leo. It's in the 5th house. It's great for acting. He's got Venus on the midheaven. His energy is going to be more feminine. It's going to be recognized in the public eye because of that Venus and that placement. But this is a difficult chart. He's got the inconjunct with the Sun and Pluto. One could make a case that there might also be kind of a death wish there with the Sun Pluto inconjunct. Very interesting chart, troubled, and we can see how the supposed sexual misconduct of Reverend DeWeird manifests in the chirotic crisis of Chiron at 14 Taurus. So there's a lot more here. I was going to look at, I plotted out his death astrologically, because it's one of those things where, they're clear it happened at a certain time, right? And so instead of dragging that chart out, what I can tell you at that time, and this is noteworthy, is that Uranus was around James Dean's Mars, during that period of time. So the proclivity for something to happen dramatically, right? Mars being the ruler of his chart, Aries rising, it was in the air. It was in the air, and he was, James Dean was reckless. They were actually part of it was part of a party. There was James Dean and his spider, and then the spider's mechanic, who had been brought in from Porsche in Germany to keep the car tuned, because James Dean was going to race that car, and they were going to do a big spread on it, and big photo shoot, and they were on their way to a speedway, and there was another car behind them, right, with the support crew, the press people, and his agent, and all this bullshit. And as they're headed to the speedway, James Dean got a speeding ticket, right? And so did the car behind him, because they're trying to keep up with him. So he was reckless. And that Uranus-Mars conjunction speaks to that. And boy, it's one of those transits that, takes a while, but it's in the air. It is in the air. And I don't think any kind of warning or any kind of guidance with James Dean would have mattered very much. That's just my opinion. Live fast, die young, leave a good corpse. He managed to achieve 2 of those things. Well, I'll let you figure out what the third one was or wasn't. All right. Let's do a little business and let's get out of here. So, of course, the sponsor of the show is True Hemp Science. True Hemp Science has been providing me with quality CBD products for quite a few years, actually. So I started to take Chris's products way back in the old days of 2015 and 2016. 2017, he got real good at the hemp. So I've been taking his product for a while. He would send me stuff. He would send me things in little plastic tubes and little vials. And I was like his test market. And I'm like, wow, this stuff is good. It's potent. And the height of that for me, really getting a lot of the products sent to me, and like, what do you think of them? That was around 2018. So now we're 5 years deep into this, and the process of perfection has really taken root. So if you want to try some fantastic CBD products, and again, every morning I have a little bit of moon dust in my coffee, go to truehempscience.com/ref/23, and you can get some good stuff. Type in 15MINS. This is the important part. If you want to get the free product, type in 15MINS upon checkout, and Chris will send you some free goodies. It's always nice. It's like Christmas when you get an order. And if you spend $100, $150 or more, you get free shipping. And then lastly, I do have another show that I do shortly after this one, 9:11 a.m. Central Standard Time. And that is 15 minutes of flame, ovflame.com. And let me bring up the graphic here so you guys get a visual. I'll leave it up there for a while. I'll talk a little bit about it. And some of you have joined us over on Chattaria, which is really great. And I've been doing 15 minutes of flame since, I think around probably about 2015, 2016. So we're going on probably about the 7th year of doing this. And started off on, I think I started this off on was it Spreaker? It might have been Spreaker, and then migrated over to YouTube. And it's me talking for about an hour and a half, looking at some of the topics of the day, sometimes mixing in different metaphysical stories. If you joined me yesterday, I detailed my trip to Vegas, the very strange respiratory symptoms that I experienced on late Saturday night, and how it dovetailed with the loss of a member of our group who was experiencing the same symptoms, which was beyond weird. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So I talked a lot about that yesterday, my experience with death, and, very kind of naked admission about my experience with death, metaphysically speaking. But, other days, whatever's on the table, we'll talk about. So that's 9:11 a.m. Over on 15 Minutes of Flame. Get that ovright.com. And that's Tuesday through Thursday, 9:11 a.m. to 10:41 a.m. And I'll be there shortly. Friday, of course, we have the Friday Forecast. I'll have a friend of mine on. She goes by Recovering Vegan. My friend Giselle Bassan, I've known her for years. She has a very interesting story. I think you'll find it to be compelling. Somebody whose life was not made better by adopting a plant-based diet, and some of the slings and arrows she's had to experience coming from the plant-based world on her journey to becoming a recovering vegan. That'll be a really interesting interview. All right, go to my website if you want to book a reading with me, get my astrological course. It's all there. Thanks, everybody. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart shape what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. From myself and Jasper, have a absolutely